My son texted me, "You're not family. The cruise is for family only." I stared at the screen until my reflection blurred through tears, then I smiled. Because that was the moment he stopped being my son and started being a stranger who owed me everything he had. Before I tell you what happened when he came back from that family vacation, like this video, subscribe to Elderly Stories, and comment where you're watching from because this isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about rebirth. You want to know what 43 years of motherhood looks like? It looks like selling your grandmother's wedding ring to pay for college tuition while telling yourself it's just jewelry. It looks like co-signing a mortgage when your own credit is shot because you chose his future over your financial security. It looks like sleeping on a hospital chair for 3 days when his wife had complications during pregnancy, holding her hand while he paced the hallways, too scared to stay in the room. I was 22 when his father died. 22 with a 3-year-old boy and a world that suddenly felt like it was made of glass, everything fragile, everything ready to shatter. I could have remarried. God knows there were opportunities. But every time a man showed interest, I'd look at my son's face and think, he needs all of me. So I gave him all of me. Every birthday, every Christmas morning, every scraped knee, every broken heart, every triumph, I was there. Not just present, but pouring myself out like water, thinking love meant emptying yourself until there was nothing left. When he graduated college, I cried harder than he did. When he got his first job, I felt prouder than if I'd won the lottery myself. When he bought that house, our house, though I didn't know it then, I helped him move every piece of furniture, my back screaming, my hands raw from cardboard cuts, but my heart so full I thought it might burst. This was what I'd worked for. This was the harvest after decades of planting. The cruise was supposed to be my first real vacation in 43 years. Not a weekend trip to see relatives, not a business conference, not a hospital visit disguised as travel. A real vacation. 7 days where I would wake up and the only person I had to take care of was myself. I'd saved for 2 years, planning every detail. I wasn't just packing clothes, I was packing dreams I'd postponed my whole life. Dreams of sleeping until noon, of eating meals I didn't cook, of watching sunsets without checking my phone for his texts. I bought new dresses. At 65, I bought new dresses like I was 25 again. I got my hair done, my nails painted a soft pink that made me feel feminine in a way I'd forgotten was possible. I practiced walking in sandals with little heels because I wanted to feel beautiful, wanted to remember what it felt like to dress for joy instead of practicality. The morning of departure, I stood in front of my mirror and barely recognized myself. The woman looking back at me had light in her eyes, anticipation in her smile. She looked like someone who mattered to herself, not just to everyone else. I took a picture, the last picture of the woman I used to be. I arrived at the airport 2 hours early because I was too excited to sit at home. I kept checking my boarding pass, my passport, my confirmation emails. Everything was perfect. Everything was finally, beautifully perfect. I watched other families checking in for the same cruise, saw grandparents with their children and grandchildren, everyone laughing, everyone belonging somewhere. Soon, I thought, that would be me. Soon I would be part of something bigger than my own 4 walls. That's when my phone vibrated. The message glowed on my screen like a neon sign in the darkness. You're not family. The cruise is for family only. I read it once. Twice. 3 times. The words didn't change. The meaning didn't soften. I looked up, and there they were, my son, his wife, my granddaughter Emma, standing in the boarding line. Not 50 feet away from me. Emma was wearing the little sailor dress I'd bought her for the trip, the one I'd wrapped so carefully and given her the week before. She was bouncing with excitement, her pigtails bobbing as she chattered to her parents. He didn't even look at me, just boarded. Like I was luggage he'd forgotten to bring. Like I was a mistake he'd corrected at the last minute. Like 43 years of my life meant less than the inconvenience of explaining my presence to his wife's family. I stood there holding my suitcase, the one I'd packed so carefully, with the new dresses and the little bottle of perfume I'd been saving for something special. I stood there while families flowed around me like water around a stone, everyone going somewhere, everyone belonging to someone. And I realized in that moment that I had spent 43 years building a relationship with a person who saw me as an obligation, not a mother. The ride home felt like a funeral procession where I was both the mourner and the corpse. Every street we passed held a memory, the park where I'd taught him to ride a bike, the school where I'd attended every parent-teacher conference, the store where I'd bought his graduation suit. My city had become a museum of my own devotion, and I was the only visitor. I walked into my house, and everything felt different. Smaller. Colder. The family photos that had always brought me joy now felt like evidence of my own delusion. There I was, beaming in picture after picture, always reaching toward him, always leaning in, always giving more of myself to the camera than he ever gave back. In every single photo, I was loving harder than I was being loved. One by one, I turned them face down. The baby pictures first, those hurt the least because that baby had loved me unconditionally. Then the school photos, the graduation pictures, the wedding shots where I stood slightly apart from his new family, smiling so hard my face ached, but never quite fitting into the frame. With each photo I turned over, I felt something inside me shifting, like furniture being rearranged in a room I'd lived in my whole life. When the last picture fell face down, I whispered to my empty house, "I'm done." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full. Full of possibility I'd forgotten existed. Full of space that had been occupied by hope for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to just breathe without expectation. For the first time in decades, I sat in my living room and didn't reach for my phone to text him. Didn't wonder what he was doing, if he needed anything, if he was happy. I just sat with myself and discovered I was still there underneath all those years of being someone else's mother. The next morning, I started cleaning. Not the desperate, frantic cleaning of a woman trying to distract herself from pain, but the methodical, purposeful cleaning of someone preparing for change. I went through closets I hadn't touched in years, drawers filled with his childhood artwork, boxes of his school reports and certificates. All evidence of a life I'd built around someone who had just informed me I wasn't family. That's when I found it. Tucked away in my filing cabinet, behind tax returns and insurance papers, was the house deed. The deed to the house where my son lived with his family. The house I'd co-signed for, the house I'd helped finance, the house where his children were growing up. And according to this legal document, that house was mine. Not jointly owned. Not co-signed. Mine. I stared at that piece of paper for a long time, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Power. Real, tangible power. For years, I had given him my heart, thinking that was all I had to offer. I never realized I also owned his roof. I called my old friend Susan, who'd worked as a paralegal for 30 years before retiring. My voice was steady when I asked her to meet me for coffee, steadier than it had been in days. Susan took one look at the deed and whistled low under her breath. "Margaret, that property is yours. Legally, fully yours. You could sell it tomorrow if you wanted to. Could I?" I asked, and something in my voice made her look at me sharply. "Honey, what's going on?" I told her about the cruise, about the text, about standing in that airport like a stranger in my own life. Susan's face grew darker with each detail, her coffee cooling in her hands. "That ungrateful little bastard," she said finally, and hearing someone else's anger on my behalf felt like permission to feel my own. "He said I wasn't family," I said quietly. "So I'm going to show him what it feels like when family disappears." The next week was the most productive week of my life. I contacted a real estate agent, a sharp young woman named Lisa who didn't ask unnecessary questions when I told her the owners were traveling and the house would be available for immediate sale. I gathered every document I needed, organized 43 years of financial records with the precision of a general planning a campaign. I froze the credit cards I'd co-signed for, closed the joint bank accounts I'd foolishly opened to help with expenses. Every financial thread that connected us, I cut with surgical precision. Each action felt like setting down a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of my body. The whole time, I felt nothing but calm. A cold, clean calm that reminded me of winter mornings when the snow is so fresh it hasn't been touched by footprints yet. People think revenge is hot, angry, chaotic. But real revenge, the kind that changes everything, is ice cold and perfectly planned. He said I wasn't family. So I became the stranger he'd made me, one who doesn't leave anything behind. While he was sipping cocktails on the deck of that cruise ship, while he was posting pictures of family time on social media, while he was enjoying the vacation I should have been part of, I was systematically removing myself from his life with the same thoroughness he'd removed me from his. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more thing I needed to do, one more gift I needed to give him. A lesson that would last longer than any punishment. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with homework, where we'd eaten thousands of meals together, where I'd listened to every heartbreak and celebrated every victory, and I wrote him a letter. To the son who taught me what love without respect feels like. You said the cruise was for family only. I took your advice. I left your family behind. Do you remember when you were 7 and you asked me why Daddy wasn't coming home anymore? I told you that sometimes people leave, but love doesn't have to leave with them. I was wrong. Love without respect isn't love at all. It's just habit wearing love's clothes. The house you lived in, the accounts you spent from, the credit you used, all belong to the woman you erased at that airport. The woman who stood there holding her suitcase like a fool, realizing that 43 years of devotion had earned her a text message dismissal. You wanted me to understand that I wasn't family. Message received. Family protects each other. Family includes each other. Family doesn't abandon each other at airports like unwanted luggage. So I'm giving you exactly what you asked for, a family vacation that truly is for family only. Permanently. Consider this my final gift, not revenge, but freedom. Freedom from the burden of a mother who loved you more than you ever wanted to be loved. Freedom from the guilt of disappointing someone whose expectations you never intended to meet anyway. I am not your safety net anymore. I am not your emergency contact, your cosigner, your fallback plan. I am not the woman who will drop everything when you call, who will babysit at a moment's notice, who will lend money she doesn't have for problems that aren't hers. I am a woman rebuilding her dignity from the ground up. You taught me that blood doesn't make family, respect does. And since you've made it clear that respect is something I'll never receive from you, I'm going to give it to myself instead. Don't look for me. Don't call me. Don't show up at my door with apologies that come too late or explanations that mean nothing now. I've already mourned the son I thought I had. I won't resurrect him for your convenience. The woman who raised you is gone. In her place is someone who finally learned the difference between being needed and being valued. Take care of your family. Your real family. The one that doesn't include me. Margaret. I sealed that letter with the same care I'd once used to seal his birthday cards, but this time there was no love in the gesture, only finality. They came home from the cruise on a Tuesday. I wasn't there to see it, but I can picture it perfectly. The taxi pulling up to the house that used to be theirs, Emma chattering about dolphins and ice cream, my son's wife probably complaining about sunburn or airline food. They would have been relaxed, tanned, full of family memories that didn't include me. The sold sign would have been the first shock. Bright red letters on white background, impossible to miss. I imagine his wife saw it first, probably made some comment about the neighbors finally moving. Then the realization would have crept in slowly, like cold water rising. Inside, my letter waited on the kitchen table like a time bomb wrapped in an envelope. I picture him reading it once, twice, his face changing from confusion to understanding to something that might have been fear. His wife would have demanded to know what it said, and he would have handed it to her with shaking hands because some truths are too heavy to carry alone. That's when he called me. My phone rang at exactly 3:47 p.m. I know because I was watching the time, waiting for this moment like a conductor waiting for the orchestra to reach the crescendo. I let it ring 4 times before I answered, my voice calm as deep water. Mom, what did you do? The panic in his voice was beautiful. Not because I'm cruel, but because it was the first time in years he'd spoken to me like I had the power to affect his life. For 43 years, I'd been background music in his story. Suddenly, I was the main character. I just followed your instructions, I said calmly. You said I wasn't family. You can't just sell our house. I can't sell my house? I asked, and the correction hung in the air like smoke. Because that's what it was. My house. My name on the deed. My credit on the line. Funny how you never noticed that detail when you were living there for free. Where are we supposed to go? Emma's school, our jobs, everything is here. I don't know, I said, and meant it. That sounds like a family problem. And as you made very clear, I'm not family. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could hear his wife crying in the background, could hear Emma asking why Mommy was sad. Part of me, the part that had been his mother for 43 years, wanted to comfort them, to fix this, to be the safety net I'd always been. But that woman was gone. In her place was someone who had learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just self-destruction with good intentions. I'm sorry, he said finally, and those 2 words carried the weight of every apology he'd never given, every hurt he'd never acknowledged, every time he'd taken my love for granted. I know you are, I said. But sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Sorry doesn't erase the feeling of standing in an airport with a suitcase, realizing your own son sees you as disposable. Sorry is just a word people use when the consequences finally catch up to them. What do you want from me? Nothing, I said, and the truth of it surprised even me. For the first time in 43 years, I want absolutely nothing from you. And that, my son, is the most freedom I've ever felt. I hung up before he could respond. Because some conversations don't need endings, they need periods. Final marks that close the chapter completely. 3 days later, I was on a plane to Lisbon. I'd always dreamed of Europe but never gone, always found reasons to spend my vacation money on his needs instead of my wants. Now, sitting by the window as we climbed above the clouds, I felt something I hadn't experienced since I was young enough to believe in fairy tales, possibility. Lisbon welcomed me like an old friend I'd never met. The streets were narrow and winding, painted in colors that had no names in English, coral that blushed toward orange, yellow that flirted with gold, blue that whispered secrets to the sky. I rented a small apartment overlooking the Tagus River, where I could watch ships come and go while drinking coffee that tasted like happiness. For the first time in decades, I woke up to sunlight that wasn't filtered through sacrifice. I could lie in bed until noon if I wanted to, could eat ice cream for breakfast, could spend entire days learning Portuguese phrases that served no purpose except joy. Saudade, they called it, a longing for something that cannot be translated. I understood that word in my bones. I enrolled in art classes, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. My hands, which had spent so many years cooking and cleaning and caring for others, learned to hold brushes and create beauty for its own sake. I painted terribly at first, wobbly flowers and lopsided buildings. But each stroke felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd forgotten existed. Photography came next. I walked the cobblestone streets with my camera, capturing moments that belonged to no one but me. Laundry hanging between buildings like prayer flags. Old men playing chess in tiny squares. Children feeding pigeons with serious concentration. My camera taught me to see again, not just look. To notice beauty that existed without purpose, without serving anyone else's needs. Language lessons followed. Portuguese rolled off my tongue like music I'd been humming my whole life without knowing the words. My teacher, a patient woman named Fatima, said I learned like someone hungry. She was right. I was starving for newness, for the challenge of being a beginner again, for the humility of not knowing everything about anything. In the evenings, I would sit on my small balcony with a glass of wine and watch the sunset paint the river gold. Sometimes I would think about him, not with anger anymore, but with something like pity. He was still living the same life in the same place, carrying the same resentments and making the same mistakes. While I was learning that happiness doesn't require anyone else's permission, I made friends slowly, carefully. Maria, who ran the bakery where I bought my morning pastry. Joao, the elderly man who played guitar in the park and taught me Fado songs that broke your heart in the most beautiful way. Isabel, an American expat who'd moved to Lisbon after her divorce and understood what it meant to rebuild yourself from scratch in a foreign country. These people knew me as Margaret, not as someone's mother, someone's helper, someone's safety net. Just Margaret, a woman learning to be enough for herself. They liked me for my terrible Portuguese and my enthusiasm for their city. They included me because I added something to their lives, not because they felt obligated or guilty or responsible for me. 6 months into my new life, a package arrived. It was small and carefully wrapped, addressed in a child's handwriting that made my heart skip before I remembered to guard it. Inside was a clay house, painted in bright colors that had no relationship to reality. Pink roof, purple walls, yellow windows that smiled like faces. Attached was a note written in the careful print of a 7-year-old. Dear Grandma, Daddy says you live far away now. I made you a house so you always have one that's yours. I miss you. Love, Emma. I held that little clay house and cried for the first time since I'd left. Not tears of pain or regret, but tears of love untouched by betrayal. Emma hadn't chosen to exclude me. Emma hadn't decided I wasn't family. Emma had just been caught in the crossfire of adult cruelty and was reaching across the distance with the only bridge she knew how to build, pure, uncomplicated love. I wrote her back immediately in careful block letters so she could read every word. Dear Emma, your house is the most beautiful house I've ever seen. It sits on my windowsill where I can see it every morning when the sun comes up. Thank you for remembering that grandmas need houses too. I miss you more than all the stars in the sky. Love, Grandma Margaret. I didn't send it to their house. I didn't know where they were living now. Instead, I sent it to my son's work address with a note that said simply, for Emma. From her grandmother who remembers what love looks like. A year passed before I saw them again. I was back in the States for a short visit, not to reconcile, but to handle some legal paperwork and see old friends. I was walking through the park where I used to take Emma to feed the ducks when I saw them. She was bigger now, her legs longer, her face more serious. But when she saw me, she broke away from her parents and ran like gravity had released its hold on her. Grandma, you came back. I knelt down and caught her, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her small arms tight around my neck. Over her shoulder, I could see my son and his wife watching warily, like I was a wild animal that might bite. I'm not here for you, I told him when Emma finally released me. I'm here for her. We spent an hour together, Emma and I. We fed the ducks and she told me about her new school, her new friends, the new house they were renting across town. She showed me a gap where she'd lost a tooth and asked if I still lived in the pretty house she'd seen in the pictures I'd sent. When it was time to go, she clung to me again. Do you have to leave? Yes, sweetheart. But leaving doesn't mean forgetting. Every time you see a beautiful sunset, you can think of me watching the same sun from far away. I kissed her forehead and stood up, finally looking directly at my son. He'd aged in the past year. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, a tightness to his mouth that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. She needs to know her grandmother, he said quietly. Yes, she does. But she doesn't need to witness adults who treat each other badly. Doors are important, Emma, I said, crouching down to her level one more time. They let love in and keep pain out. Remember that. I walked away without looking back, but I could feel their eyes on me until I turned the corner. It felt like walking away from my old life for the second time, but easier now. Cleaner. I wasn't running from pain anymore. I was walking toward peace. Back in Lisbon, life resumed its gentle rhythm. I joined a book club where we discussed Portuguese literature in 3 different languages. I volunteered at a local school, teaching English to children who looked at me with the same wonder Emma once had. I learned to cook dishes I'd never heard of, to dance steps that made me laugh at my own clumsiness. On quiet evenings, I would think about the woman I used to be. The one who measured her worth by how much she could give to others, who believed love meant erasing yourself for someone else's comfort. That woman had been good and kind and generous. She had also been slowly dying, suffocating under the weight of unreturned devotion. Some people called what I did cruel. My old neighbor Mrs. Peterson told Susan it was harsh and unforgiving. Easy words to use when you've never stood in an airport holding a suitcase, watching your own child treat you like an inconvenience. Easy judgments from people who've never given 43 years to someone who responds with a text message dismissal. I learned something in Lisbon that I wish I'd known at 22. Love without respect is not love. It's martyrdom. And martyrs don't get rewarded in this life. They just get used until there's nothing left to use. My son learned what loss feels like when it's sudden and complete. I learned what freedom feels like when you stop asking permission to value yourself. He learned that actions have consequences that can't be fixed with apologies. I learned that boundaries aren't walls. They're gates that let the right people in and keep the wrong energy out. 6 months ago, I received another letter. This one was from him, not Emma. 2 pages of remorse and recognition, of understanding that came too late but came nonetheless. He learned, he said, what it meant to feel abandoned. His wife had left him when the money ran out and the stress became too much. He was living in a studio apartment now, seeing Emma every other weekend, building a life that finally matched the responsibility he was willing to take for it. He was sorry, he wrote. He understood now what he'd done. He wanted to make it right. I read that letter 3 times, sitting on my balcony with the Tagus River flowing below me like time itself. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with Emma's playhouse. Not to save it, but to acknowledge it. To honor the fact that learning, even when it comes too late, is still learning. I didn't write back. Some apologies don't require responses. They require space to exist without expectation of forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't something you give to someone else anyway. It's something you give to yourself when you're ready to stop carrying the weight of their choices. But I did send Emma a postcard from the most beautiful church in Lisbon, one covered in blue and white tiles that told stories and pictures. On the back, I wrote, "Some things are too beautiful for words. Just like some people are too precious for anything but love." People ask me if I have regrets. The answer is complicated. I regret that it took me 65 years to learn my own worth. I regret that I taught my son to take me for granted by accepting less than I deserved for so long. I regret that Emma has to grow up watching adults make mistakes that hurt the people they're supposed to love. But I don't regret leaving. I don't regret teaching him that love has limits and disrespect has consequences. I don't regret choosing myself when no one else would. Because here's what I learned in the cobblestone streets of Lisbon, in art classes where I painted my feelings in colors that had no names, in language lessons where I learned that saudade means missing something so much it becomes part of who you are. Revenge fades, but self-respect never dies. The woman who stood in that airport with her suitcase is gone. In her place is someone who knows that love means inclusion, not obligation. Someone who understands that family is defined by behavior, not blood. Someone who learned that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt like the person giving more love than you receive, if you've ever stood somewhere holding your heart like a suitcase no one wanted to help you carry, remember this. Sometimes love means walking away. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let someone treat you badly in love's name. Subscribe to Elderly Stories if you want to hear more truths that hurt before they heal. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and remember, you teach people how to treat you by what you're willing to accept. I'm watching the sunset over Lisbon now, and it's painting the river the same gold color as Emma's hair. Somewhere across the ocean, my granddaughter is probably getting ready for bed, maybe thinking about the grandmother who lives far away but loves her bigger than the sky. That's enough for me. Love without strings attached, without conditions, without the weight of expectation. Pure love, the kind that asks for nothing but gives everything that matters. The woman I am now, she's enough for herself. And that makes her enough for anyone worth knowing. The rest of the world can keep their complicated love, their conditional affection, their relationships built on guilt and obligation. I'll take my simple life in a foreign city, where I wake up every morning belonging to myself first and everyone else second. It took 65 years and a text message that broke my heart to learn that lesson. But some education is worth any price you pay for it, even if the price is everything you thought you knew about love.